Today on Inside Utah Politics, Representative Blake Moore. He's in studio to discuss student loan forgiveness, federal spending, and efforts to save the Great Salt Lake. Plus,
we're going to choose to build a better America, a better America.
President Biden highlighting his agenda ahead of the crucial midterms. We have reaction from both sides as the balance of power is up for grabs.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We do begin this morning with Representative Blake Moore here to discuss some of the big issues he's working on in the nation's capital. Representative, welcome back to the show. Glad to have you with us today.
Oh, it's good to be here.
Let's start off with federal student loan forgiveness. It's been a big issue. Happened the official announcement a couple weeks ago, but still people are talking about it. You came out strongly against it. Explain why.
Yeah, and we were unified in that from your Utah delegation. I would break it down into three main buckets. First and foremost, that's an unprecedented amount of spending coming from an executive fiat. Like we're talking anywhere the range from anywhere from $400 billion to $1 trillion in some assessments. And that type of stuff has to go through Congress. So first and foremost, that's a big action. Second, and I'm hearing this from a lot of people, is there's an unfairness to this. I just finished paying my student loans. I don't want to teach my kids moral hazard and that the government's just going to step in and take care of their debt at some point. There's an unfairness to this, and that was fundamental to my statement. Was like we got plumbers, electricians, and other trades that decided to go a different route. And then just lastly, it does nothing at the root of the problem. Costs are going up, and the way this policy will work is it doesn't incentivize universities to do what I see a lot of our Utah universities do, particularly the areas that I represent. We were Utah State. They have a lot of focus on workforce needs and getting students to jobs with reducing as much debt as possible, and they have excellent ROI programs, and something that I've been focused on. I really appreciate the work they're doing.
Okay, a couple of things. First off, some opponents are threatening legal action against the president. Do you believe the president has the authority in his office to do what he did with this?
No, and that's kind of what I started with. That's an enormous amount of spending that needs to come from the body of Congress that represents the people.
Okay, so let's dig into that a little bit more. If this were to go to Congress, what, if anything, would get done when it comes to maybe not loan forgiveness, but addressing the skyrocketing cost of college, which is getting out of reach for more and more people?
Well, one of the reasons was college's tuition is skyrocketing. Look at another provision in this particular bill. You have a 5% cap, and it goes to with whatever your income is, that after 20 years is forgiven. You've got students now that are going to be like, well, I could take out more loan. Colleges are not going to be incentivized to keep their costs in check. And so fundamentally, this policy adds to that. So first and foremost, not going this direction is something that I support. Now, I also like to highlight a lot of things that Utah is doing. Back when I was in school, the tech centers, the vocational work, there was a bit of it wasn't as popular, and it wasn't as parents weren't pushing their kids in to go that direction. Nowadays, we got juniors and seniors supported by local leaders getting free tuition to go to a tech center. I represent several of them: Davis Tech, Ogden Weber, Bridgerland, UB Tech. Now we've got kids in high school going and learning a trade, whatever type of computer science or culinary or whatever it is. They go learn a trade, they go to a four-year institution if they choose to do that. They now have an ability to work, do a job that can help them actually get through college and reduce that amount of loan. That's an area that we're working together to make sure workforce is addressed, and not just saying like, hey, universities, people can take out as much loans as they want. And we're not gonna limit our costs at all.
The president has been defending this vigorously in his appearances out on the campaign trail, and he's sharing real people's experiences. I'm sure you've probably seen some of them.
Of course.
For example, a 50-year-old couple now has that burden off their table, saving for their first home. What's your response when you hear how it has impacted some people individually?
Yeah, more inflationary spending, which this creates this. More inflationary spending goes directly to inflation, and I can see the cost and the effect that 9% inflation has had on my constituents. That is a far bigger burden, and something that if we don't get that in check and get that reduced to what is standard and typical for inflation, then we're all going to be suffering from this. And I know President Biden's going to highlight some of those stories that he hears, but he's not highlighting the stories that I'm hearing about the fairness of this particular thing. And those that just paid off their student loan, they're frustrated that now, well, geez, I would have waited and I would have been less responsible. You know, that kind of, so it's just an unfair policy that type of spending has to go through Congress, and the amount of executive action that he has, and there's been an enormous amount of legal challenges to a lot of his executive orders, and I anticipate there'll be, you know, something playing out here too.
Let's stick on the notion of spending and talk a little bit about the Inflation Reduction Act, another thing the president is hitting big. Do you believe that that will reduce inflation?
No.
You voted no for it. You've come out against that as well. Explain why you do not believe that's the right way to go.
So what we're seeing politically here in Congress right now is, you know, when one party has control of Congress, they're able to get something done through what's called the budget reconciliation process. And that goes through straight party line votes. Right? Now, when Republicans had those majorities, the White House, the House, and the Senate, they did the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. When Democrats had that same situation politically, when they had the White House, House, and Senate, they did ARPA, American Rescue Plan. And then they went, that was a $1.9 trillion bill, and then they immediately went on to Build Back Better for $3.5 trillion. Ultimately, Manchin squashed that, and then you had this most recent bill. We have seen inflation get ignited directly from an enormous amount of government spending. Now, they didn't get everything that they wanted to get through, but there was an enormous amount that they got through based on those party line things. Now, that's their prerogative. They recognize they probably weren't going to be able to maintain majorities for longer than maybe this two-term. So they went big, they went aggressive, they did as much spending as they could possibly get through. Not necessarily what we needed, but what they could get done, what Senator Manchin would ultimately agree with on this most recent bill. None of these things are inflationary reduction. Reducing inflation is to come together and figure out how to get our deficits into check, and that's going to be something that we address.
You bring up Senator Manchin. I realize that's the other chamber, but he made an important message. He said Republicans are never going to get on board when it comes to coming together to get something done, and that's why he sided in favor of this. How can the two sides come together and make something happen that would be agreeable for both sides?
Yeah, so I think what you'll see going forward, if Republicans take back the House of Representatives in this election cycle, you will see split government. And if we would have had split government over the last year, like say Republicans didn't lose the Georgia Senate, which we should have never lost. We can get into that however you want to, but we should have never lost the Georgia Senate. And doing so created this opportunity for Democrats to take their initiatives, and that's had some negative side effects. Republicans, in a situation where there is divided government, there will be lots of initiatives that will be, you know, forced to work together. When was the last time we actually balanced the budget as our nation? Now, we're in a different position than we were back in '97, but that was in a split government type of situation. You had a Democrat in the White House, you had a Republican-led Congress. They found ways to work together. They made reforms to welfare, and then they found ways for each side to get something, and ultimately what came of it was a surplus for a few years.
Want to get to the Great Salt Lake real quick. We are literally watching it disappear. Such an important asset to our community in so many ways. The consequences far-reaching. You have a bill, I'm going to read it here. It's the Saline Lake Ecosystems in the Great Basin States Program Act. It's already passed the House. First off, what will it do?
So what it does is it provides a study from the U.S. Geological Survey. And all of the advocacy groups, from Audubon Society to industry to a lot of strong work from, to highlight, our governor and our state legislature putting an enormous amount of focus on this. This will provide a data-driven approach to help those decision makers make the important decisions that they have to do. This is not going to be solved at the federal level. This is a way that our office was able to, you know, interact with our local leaders that I think are putting as much emphasis as they possibly can on this, and create a federal opportunity here for us to lean in and provide, you know, good sound data. It's going to look at what's taken place in other areas where a lake may have been dried up, like Owens Lake, and other areas that are in a similar situation. It's had broad support. We got it through the House, and we're hoping to see that it, you know, finalize it.
Okay, sounds good. We've run out of time, unfortunately. There's more we could get into, but appreciate your time. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Still to come, the race for U.S. Senate in Utah is coming down the stretch. Can independent candidate Evan McMullin pull off the upset over Senator Mike Lee? Our panel debates a little later. But first, an update on COVID-19, what the Biden administration is doing to stop the spread of the virus after the break. President Joe Biden was busy over the Labor Day weekend highlighting his administration's achievements ahead of the midterm election, also taking the time to call out Republicans and the former president. Washington correspondent Basil John reports on the president's messaging.
The president made stops in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, touting his push to build up the economy while further distancing supporters of the former president.
We're going to choose to build a better America. A better America.
President Joe Biden spent the weekend focused on how his administration is doing more for Americans.
The middle class built America. Everybody knows that. But unions built the middle class. Manufacturers all over the world are coming to the United States.
Besides highlighting legislation passed under his administration, he criticized Republicans in Congress for work they did in the past.
Republicans passed a $2 trillion tax cut, mainly benefiting the wealthiest corporations under the Trump administration.
The president also took a shot at the former president and his supporters.
Extreme MAGA Republicans don't just threaten our personal rights and our economic security. They embrace political violence.
Former President Donald Trump also gave a speech over the weekend criticizing President Biden.
Skyrocketing inflation, rampant crime, soaring murders, crushing gas prices.
And Trump highlighted how the president referred to supporters of the former president
as threats to democracy and as enemies of the state. You're all enemies of the state. He's an enemy of the state.
Both the president and the former president also took the opportunity to show support for the candidates in the Pennsylvania Senate race as the open seat is hotly contested. Reporting in Washington, I'm Basil John.
New booster shots have experts hopeful that we can avoid a fall COVID surge, but the White House team says the pandemic could get worse if Congress doesn't act. Washington correspondent Hannah Brandt explains why.
The White House COVID team says their pandemic budget is running out. And now that Congress is back from break, they're pleading with lawmakers to pass more COVID funding. It may be time for a trip to your local pharmacy.
Get your updated COVID-19 shot as soon as you are eligible.
A new booster was just approved specifically to fight the latest variant. The White House COVID team says this could become an annual routine.
I really believe this is why God gave us two arms, one for the flu shot and the other one for the COVID shot.
But along with this rollout, they have a warning.
While we may have the vaccines today for folks for this fall vaccine effort, we don't know what's coming next.
They already asked Congress to pass more pandemic funding 6 months ago, but that didn't happen. And the White House says their COVID budget has been dwindling ever since. In order to make these new boosters free and widely available, they say they had to make tough choices and cut things like their free test website.
We need to play the long game against this virus. That is going to require additional resources from Congress.
Right now, Congress is debating a new budget for the upcoming year, and the White House team says lawmakers have a responsibility.
It is now critical that you step up and provide additional COVID-19 funding so we can stay ahead of this virus.
Specifically, the White House is requesting $22 billion for future COVID vaccines, testing, and research. In Washington, I'm Hannah Brandt.
Still to come, the midterm election less than 2 months away now. What's at stake with the balance of power up for grabs? Our panel debates after the break. Time now for a closer look at some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Auditor John Dougal and House Minority Leader Brian King. Gentlemen, great to have both of you on the show. Thanks for being here with us.
Good to be with you.
Let's start off with the race for Senate. We are now less than 2 months away from Decision Day. Evan McMullen, the independent candidate in the race, hosting a town hall during the week on Wednesday in which former RNC Chair Michael Steele was a guest. Also, former Congressman Ben McAdams, among others. Representative, let's start with you. How is this playing out for the challenger in this race as he tries to appeal to people from multiple parties?
It's a fascinating dynamic. Evan McMullen is trying to thread a needle here. He's trying to appeal to moderate Republicans, to the kind of Republicans that support Mitt Romney in Utah, as well as independents and Democrats. And I think his success and he has a decent chance of success. I mean, I call him the underdog, but I still think that he has a very good chance at upending Lee, and he's got to have strong support from Democrats. He's got to have a good turnout from independents, and he's got to have support from that moderate, pragmatic group of Republican voters who just can't stomach the kind of conservative Republicans that Donald Trump appeals to.
John, let's bring you in. Will Republicans be willing to cross the party line and vote for an independent in this race?
I think it's difficult for two reasons. First of all, Mike Lee has postured this race. It's between Mike Lee and Joe Biden, and whose vision is better. And where a lot of Republicans have a lot of concern with Joe Biden and his vision for America. So that's one of those challenges. The other thing is, Evan McMullin has to prove that he can actually do something in the Senate. He says he's going to be independent. He's not going to caucus with either party, which for a lot of folks, they're wondering, well, does that mean you're actually going to be able to get anything done?
All right. Representative, let's dig into that a little bit more. You talk about you think it's possible here, but a lot of insiders take a look at this race and they have a really hard time jumping from a reliably red state that Utah has been for so long to going independent. So how do you see that? What would be a key of making that happen?
Well, John Dougal just gives us one, which is, how do people in Utah feel about Joe Biden? As Joe Biden's approval numbers increase incrementally over the country and in Utah to some degree, you're going to find more and more people who find that the partisan dichotomy that Senator Lee is setting up as Lee versus Biden becomes less compelling. That was a better line for Lee about 2 or 3 months ago when we have gas prices through the roof and we don't have the Democrats in Congress accomplishing anything that working people in Utah can say helps them. But now that we've seen inflation tamed a little bit, at least on the gas front, and we've seen Democrats in Congress come up with bills that have addressed some of the problems that working Utah's day-to-day problems that they face, such as healthcare costs and inflation and infrastructure, things like that. I think that they're going to be looking a little harder at the possibility of, well, let's go ahead and go with Evan McMullin.
John, address that. Do you think Utahns are starting to come around as, I mean, prices are still really high, but they have come down some recently?
There's going to be a few that on the margins are going to look and say, okay, it's a little bit better than a few months ago, just like Brian said. But overall, gas prices are still high. The cost of food is still high. People are still concerned about the economy. And we just saw the president just a few days ago basically poke a bunch of Republicans in the eye and have as much contempt as Trump has for politics.
That was actually a very fascinating dynamic we saw play out during the week. In fact, we ran a story on that very issue in the block before you two gentlemen came on. This back and forth between President Biden and former President Trump. Representative, do you see that being successful in any way when the president comes out and calls the former president and his supporters the enemy of the state?
Well, I think that when you see more and more information coming to light about just what the former president was up to in terms of taking national security documents, top secret documents, and keeping them at his own home, trying to hide them basically from investigators who were looking for them. And then there are questions about why he was doing so. Was he trying to line his own pockets by selling state secrets about the nuclear capacity of other countries to countries that were enemies of those countries that had the state secrets? Those are all the kinds of questions that I think call into question whether, in fact, today's Republican Party, who is led, quite honestly, by Donald Trump, is the kind of force politically that we want in power, that we want to retain power for, and that there's doubt in people's minds about whether, in fact, the Republican Party today is fundamentally committed to the kind of government that we've honored for over 200 years. A democratic republic that lives by its constitutional principles, believes in a peaceful transition of power. It's becoming more and more clear that Donald Trump, at least, and his followers are not committed to that. And I think what Joe Biden is doing is calling it out. He's calling the reality of that situation, saying, hey, let's be honest. Let's face what we're dealing with here and let's address it in the way that is going to be most likely to save our country.
All right, John, your thoughts on that and the impact it could potentially have as we come across the finish line?
Well, the simple fact is the president clearly wants to make this race between him and Trump. I think for a lot of Utahns, Utah Republicans, they've kind of moved past. Trump symbolizes a system that's been stacked against them. And if we're talking about concerns about folks, we have examples on both sides of the aisle of people saying that election's illegitimate or that Supreme Court's illegitimate, on and on and on. We've got various problems on both sides of the aisle when it comes to people tearing down the Constitution, tearing down our government. And we all individually need to fight to preserve that Constitution.
Okay, this is a crucial midterm when you take a look at the makeup of both the House and Senate, razor thin margin in the Senate, and very thin in the House as well. What's at stake, Representative, as we come down to this midterm election?
Oh, it's tremendously important that you're going to see a lot change if Republicans take over the U.S. House or the U.S. Senate. If they take over the U.S. Senate, there are going to be no more judicial nominations that move forward. They'll just stop dead in their tracks. That's what our majority leader, the future majority leader, if that's the situation, Mitch McConnell would make sure happened, is that those nominations from Joe Biden would go nowhere. If you see the Republicans rather take over the House, I think you're still going to see a lot of work on the part of those leaders in the House for the Republicans trying to investigate Joe Biden. It wouldn't surprise me at all to see them drop articles of impeachment against Joe Biden. If the Democrats are able to retain power, you're going to see a federal government that's able to continue to accomplish things as they have the last few weeks and months that benefit and address directly the problems that Utahns and the people in the United States of America are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. I think it's critically important that Utahns understand that and that they go out and vote accordingly to make sure that we move forward in a productive, positive way to address the people's needs.
John, the balance of power up for grabs. What's at stake as we go down these last few weeks?
Well, what's at stake is trying to fight against the president, ramrodding all sorts of agendas down the American people's throat. Government is getting too involved in people's lives, everyday lives, way too expansive, and so we want to see Senator Lee and others fight against that. We want that freedom and liberty for the everyday American, and we don't want government having a heavy hand picking winners and losers and driving up the national debt.
Okay, we just went through a redistricting process. Your colleagues up for election in the House this year as well, Representative. Only 17 members of your caucus, a major minority there, and in the Senate only 6. How do you see the redistricting process impacting the upcoming makeup of next year's legislature?
Well, the redistricting process that we went through last year was something that certainly realigned things in a way that generally was more helpful for Republicans than Democrats. It had a tendency to make blue Democratic seats safer and make red Republican seats safer, and for a few swing districts had a tendency to move them more to be competitive in a way that favors Republicans. But I do think that you're going to see some close races, some swing districts. Representative Rosemary Lesser up in Ogden is in a tight fight, but I think she's going to come out okay on that. We've got Jim Dunnigan and Lynette Wendell fighting it out here in Salt Lake County. We've got Claire Collard fighting it out over in Magna, Liz Waite fighting it out in West Valley. These are all people who are incumbents and that are sitting in swing districts right now. And I think that on the whole, you've seen some real changes in the last couple of months. I think the Dobbs decision, quite honestly, is going to be helpful because it makes people realize we don't want elected officials sitting in the legislature to make the decisions about the most private, personal matters that we have in our lives.
Okay, real quick, we're running out of time, but I want to give John an opportunity to assess what we could see in the legislature.
As you mentioned, the Democrats are a very small minority of the legislature. I think you may see Republicans pick up a seat, maybe lose a seat. It's right on the margin there. It all depends what shakes out in the next couple months.
All right, and we will be following that. Gentlemen, appreciate your insight. Thanks so much for being here.
Great to be with you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave you now to look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. Summer recess coming to an end for Congress. The Senate returning during the week. The House follows on Tuesday, September 13th. The Citizens Climate Lobby hosting a climate solutions panel with candidates in Utah's 1st and 3rd congressional districts. That is set for September 26th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. at the Salt Lake City Library Auditorium. The general election is Tuesday, November 8th. Thanks so much for making us part of your Sunday morning. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.